Hi, everyone. Everyone is muted right now, so you will be able to hear me and Jan, and my best friend Brian is here. So we are going to get started here in just a few minutes. If you guys know anything about today, you know that Jan is an expert in dementia care, and she has over 3 decades of experience. So the information that she's going to share with us today is extremely valuable and should help you all in your dementia care. I will pass things over to Jan and turn off my camera so I'm not distracting you all. But if you have questions, over on the right-hand side of your screen, you're going to be able to type in a question, and you'll either be prompted for when we're going to answer those during the presentation, or we'll answer everyone's questions at the end. So please type in any questions or responses that Jan prompts you to, and enjoy.
Thank you. Well, what a joy to join you all here this late afternoon. Thank you for joining in. And I think for some, this will be a review of information that helps ensure that people living with dementia in your care homes can live their best. And certainly with all the disruption we're seeing in all of our lives, clearly no one is untouched right now with how this coronavirus and COVID is striking. But I think that clearly, unequivocally, it is affecting our older adult population who are living in residential settings like care homes, in that restrictions have become even greater. And I'm reminded as I watch the news and try to follow along what's happening, how we're really not talking about the very special work that each of you are doing to ensure that your residents can enjoy a good quality of life during a very disruptive time, and certainly staff coming in with many uncertainties of their own. So if there was ever a time that we needed calm, this is certainly it, especially for people who are living with dementia. So what we're going to do here over this next 45 minutes, 50 minutes or so, and then have some time for discussion during and then after, is just talk about why it is so important to maintain a daily routine for individuals to minimize their stress and anxiety. And I'm going to parallel it to even our own lives. I think we're finding many parallels in the uncertainty of living right now that create our own lack of control that can lead to our own anxiety and even agitation coming our way. We're going to talk about why communication practices, especially appealing to the emotion, become so incredibly important in keeping residents comfortable. And we know emotions are running high for especially family members who might not be visiting in the same way as they once did, or people feeling cut off even from friends that help them to stay connected. And we'll talk about maybe some creative ways that you can assist family and friends to feel like they're staying connected to the people that you love as well. And then we know keeping people engaged throughout the day is incredibly important as it engages people in quality of life. So we'll talk about a variety of methods that can be done. And I'm going to share with you, just like Oprah has her favorites, Jan has her favorites too. I think in using some new technologies that help engage people throughout the day. So we know that there really is a challenge in providing care for people who are living with dementia, whether they're at home with family members or they move to residential care, because we know that just the nature of dementia, regardless of the type of whether it be Alzheimer's or Lewy body or frontal temporal or mixed dementia, that these changes in memory and thinking really do lead to some real challenges in the person's ability to take in information, process it, store it, and then respond to whatever that information might be, whether it's verbal, whether it's what we take in by what we see, what we smell, what we taste, again, even what we feel. So all of the senses are very much geared in terms of how our brain processes them. And we know that as people live with these conditions, and we know know that dementias are all progressive by nature, that just their ability to tolerate stress changes over time and is diminished over time. And that stress can build up throughout the day. And quite honestly, stress builds up throughout the day for all of us. And in dementia, what we're likely to say is that as the stress builds, ultimately it's going to be expressed in what we call unwanted behaviors. But truth be told, when you think about stress for all of us can build up, and we can see stress in our own lives. For example, those who are having to school their children at home throughout the day, I imagine that moms and dads are also seeing stress build up. And you know, our behaviors maybe as we're yelling or we become more impatient or whatever that might look like. So we're all prone to that, but particularly when our brains are changing, people are going to respond far more easily to added stress. So in this next slide, I have the privilege of having worked with Dr. Jerry Hall, who's a kind of a nurse pioneer from Iowa, who did her dissertation many years ago, saying that really the issue becomes that people living with dementia have progressively lowered stress thresholds, meaning that over time their ability to manage stressors of the day becomes far more limited. And you can see the graphic on the left shows that for the most part, you know, here are people who can still regulate their emotions and manage their behavior and keep things in check. But even for all of us, we cross a threshold where we might see anxiety build. And as it continues to build over the course of a day, behavior becomes dysfunctional. And so her research really began to look at kind of why are these behavioral disrupts, or I like to call them behavioral expressions, occurring, and what are really the causative factors? Because if we could understand the cause, then we're often able to mitigate what might be leading to some of these unwanted behavioral expressions. And in her work, she found that fatigue was a causative factor, as we see, I think, in our own lives, that as we become more tired, that it's more difficult to even manage our own emotions, but even more so for the person living with dementia. And quite honestly, right now are often at 5 p.m. the bewitching hours for people living with dementia, because they've been working hard all day to stay on task and their brains become very fatigued. And with this, then we often see that this dysfunctional behavior that we call sundowning is the increased anxiety and even agitation, physical or verbal, that grows, or even added confusion. We learn that change is very disruptive for the person living with dementia. In fact, you know, we have the expression that we are all creatures of habit. And the reality is our habits are what keep us very comfortable. And again, I'm going to parallel for us to really think about how our current situation impacts us, let alone a person living with dementia. So I would say that most of us have found that our routines have changed quite dramatically over the last 4 to 5 weeks of being shut in. And we're finding that we can't have the routines the way they've had it, and it's quite honestly become quite uncomfortable for folks. And some folks probably aren't very happy with this. Well, likewise for the person living with dementia, we find that if there is constant or added change, that adds to the demand that they're living with and the stress to have to accommodate. And in fact, I imagine many of you have seen this if a new caregiver comes into the home and is not familiar with the residents' routines, and we find that often this change in caregiver can even add to the behavioral expressions we might see for those folks living with dementia. We've learned that when people are overstimulated or understimulated, again, I think of understimulation, really nothing happening in the course of the day. Here's an individual who can't self-initiate activity any longer. A couple things are either happening, they're either sleeping or they're creating trouble. And I joke, but it's true, nurses and engineers cause some of the biggest troubles in in care facilities or even at home, as they're often very busy people, and now finding themselves without anything to do, they can often start taking things apart, following people around, bossing people around, etc. Likewise, overstimulation can add a lot of stress, and I think you've probably all observed this. Perhaps a large family comes in for a visit, and it's a lovely visit, but they're creating lots of noise, or there's kids running around doing what kids do, just having lots of fun. But this overstimulation just really creates a lot of stress and sometimes some unwanted comments from others. We often say that sometimes we're creating too much demand for people living with dementia. That is, we're expecting them to do things that they can no longer do. And it's very common for us when a person perhaps is just wanting to get dressed, or perhaps they're in the midst of some sort of care activity, and we say to them, well, just try a little bit harder, not understanding that they're trying as hard as they can, but they've now hit a wall in terms of their brain doesn't know what to do next. Us asking them to try harder creates more demands. Or perhaps we've had the experience when a family member has come in to visit and pre-announces to the resident that a family member or friend is coming to visit, but the visit is weeks away, and now we have a person who rapidly forgets the detail but does remember the emotional part, that somebody's coming to visit, and they ask repeatedly, when are they coming, when are they coming, when are they coming? That would be another example of creating too much demand, and that creates a lot of added stress for that particular person. When we talk about under or overstimulation, I often think of activities of, do people have things that are meaningful to do? And in fact, here's our current situation, that many of us are lacking the activities that brought us purpose, brought us connection with others, whether it be going to the gym, whether it be meeting up for coffee, or even this past Easter Sunday or Passover that was being celebrated by so many who acknowledge religious holidays. Just the lack of having these rituals, I think, brought distress for many individuals. And then finally, delirium, which is kind of confusion on confusion, is sudden confusion, we know will definitely lower the stress of this person, and we're likely to see behavioral expressions. I do want to add on, though, a couple additional things that do add stress for people who are living with dementia. And that is, as the disease progresses, and I know that many of you are caring for people with moderate to advanced dementia in your care homes, that their unmet needs add tremendous amount of stress, and they will express themselves in behavioral expressions. So if a person is hungry, if they're thirsty, if they're hot, if they're cold, if they need to get up and move, if they have pain, if they need to have a bowel movement, or they're wet, let's say they wear a brief, we're likely to see this result in a behavioral expression. And this does add tremendous stress, because here's something's going wrong physiologically. I have a basic need, and now I don't have the words to express what it is I need or that I want, and I'm likely now to express it in a behavioral manner. I do want to draw your attention thinking about depression at this point in time as well, and I'd be curious to hear from you if you believe your residents, even without dementia, if you're seeing greater levels of depression. Again, are you seeing mood change? Are you seeing more withdrawal, more isolation, or on the other end of the spectrum, more irritability, sharp tongues that perhaps you did not hear in the past? And certainly depression adds stress when we think about our brains, and depression very much dictates how our mood is going to play out throughout the day. And then finally, we think about pain in so many older adults, in particular with more moderate to advanced dementia, who are not moving as much. Now, this is not pain that necessarily needs to have a narcotic to treat it, but rather just movement. And yet, when we then move a person who hasn't been moving, we're more likely to see expressions in a person who actually doesn't want to participate, maybe in a light chair exercise program, because in fact, they perceive there's greater pain that's happening. And can that play into expressions as well? So it's interesting as we think about what we like to call in the medical area of dementia care, the behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia. You know, are they just normal human responses? And there's Dr. Al Powers, whose work I really like, that likes to compare kind of how we label some of the behaviors. And in fact, there's a lady who lives in Australia. Her name is Kate Swaffer. She was diagnosed a number of years ago with a language variant type of frontal temporal dementia. And she just wrote a recent commentary about the behavioral and psychological symptoms of COVID-19 and how interesting it was to compare these behaviors to what we say people are living with dementia. So as we look at this graphic, when you and I get bored, when we are now maybe more telecommuting from home, or we need to take a break, or our kids do from homework, it's interesting that we allow people to get up and move, to get out and go take a walk. And yet for people living with dementia, we're likely to label them as having wandering behavior. Again, when we get restless, when we're forced into other people's rhythms, or we're restless now because the rhythms that we knew are changed, force us to maybe not be as focused as we were in the past. It's interesting that people living with dementia were likely to say that they sundown. Again, we've gone through recent lack of toilet paper and paper towels, and we still are yet to find Lysol wipes anywhere. Now that's shopping in bulk, because you go to Costco or to Sam's Club, but boy, to the person living with dementia, all of a sudden we say they start hoarding. And we get angry, sad, anxious, frustrated just from daily life, and we're allowed to do that. And yet for people living with dementia, we often say they're exhibiting challenging behaviors. And we don't like being restricted, bossed around, or treated with disrespect, or even touched by strangers, and particularly touching, I think, in the nature of caregiving, unfortunately puts us in positions where we need to touch individuals. And yet, if I don't receive it or don't understand it because my brain is not processing, you're likely to call me resistive, combative, agitated, or aggressive. So it's a fascinating place I think we find ourselves in, even more lately, thinking about how our rhythms in life have changed in a way that is affecting how you and I respond, and the parallels of how we label this as perhaps dysfunction. So I'm going to just maybe stop there and see, Molly, if there are any questions that have come in or any comments that any of our participants might have.
I don't have any just yet, but if anyone wants to ask one, we can answer some here.
And just like we do in dementia care, we're really flexible here, because we don't have the luxury of looking at one another and drawing upon our body language or kind of seeing that bubble thought. But if you have it, please feel free, Molly, to stop me and break in.
Perfect.
Jan, I have a question.
Yes.
So perhaps you could talk a little bit about the stress that caregivers are experiencing, and how they can help handle themselves or work together to handle each other to help make things calm for.
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to get to that as I talk about a communication, Brian, because that is a really important one. I think it's important that we are doing incredibly stressful work, and we bring our stress with us. So it's not like we check it at the door, is it? You know, we leave from home, and lots of things are happening there, especially in households now where children are back home, where, you know, a lot of that schoolwork adds a lot of stress. And now we're walking out and perhaps leaving our children with another family member or spouse, and, you know, worried about what is going to happen next. And so that stress unfortunately comes in with us, and it's because it's normal and we're humans. And yet what especially our other residents might feel, and if our coworkers don't know us and if we haven't communicated our stress, is likely to be misinterpreted. And in fact, we often see the negative energy go up than in the home particularly. So I'm going to come back to that with some suggestions, if that's all right. But absolutely, we bring stress with us to our daily lives and to our work. And again, that's not because we're not good and not caring people. It's just the reality of what happens. But we've got to learn how to manage our stress so that it doesn't rub off on the person living with dementia.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for bringing that up. So let's talk about some strategies that kind of help to mitigate some of that stress threshold. So what we know in dementia care is that structure, routine, and rest are absolutely paramount throughout the day. Yet each resident is very unique, and so it's so important to have an abbreviated life story that we get a sense of what is unique about an individual, a little bit about their history, what they like to talk about, what they like to do, what their routines are that keep them comfortable, as well as the things that they like, maybe what they like to eat, how much cream they like in their coffee, when they like to have it, as well as dislikes become incredibly important. In fact, I like to know dislikes as much as I like to know likes, mainly because I want to stay away from anything that's going to add to the discomfort of that person. And then the idea of having this life story is so that we all get to understand a resident and their unique needs and can share that throughout the course of the time that we're caring for them, not only from days to nights, but from month to month as things change over time. Again, because we're able to minimize the disrupt and the uncertainty. As we said, people living with dementia have a very difficult time with change. And so the more we're able to keep this structure and routine in place, the more comfortable the resident is likely to be. And it's not so much that we have to do things by a certain time of the clock, but rather that we do it in the order of how a person is likely to respond. So for example, many people will eat a meal, breakfast, for example, in the morning, and they'll forget that they've had it and will come back and say, I need breakfast, when in fact they've already had it. And yet, if there was a routine in which the person got their breakfast so that they perhaps came to breakfast in the morning in their robe, and after breakfast they got dressed, it would be much easier, again, to cue this person to say, well, as a matter of fact, you're dressed, and you get dressed after you have breakfast. Now, if a person still wants breakfast, obviously we're going to give them a muffin or whatever is going to keep them comfortable, but it's just really more the order of the routine that provides a sense of certainty and that the day is moving. As I've said from the very beginning, that fatigue is a huge portion of what leads to a lot of added stress as the day goes by. And it's important to provide rest periods throughout the day. I often find that the mornings can lead to a lot of added stress because we're talking about a person getting up and getting dressed, or perhaps getting washed up or bathed before the day begins, and having breakfast. And while that might seem relatively minor, the more the person participates in doing for themselves, the more thinking that has to go into those tasks. Therefore, we're more likely to see more fatigue. So a mid-morning nap or just rest period can be incredibly helpful. So we need to look for that in each person, because each person's routine is going to dictate how fatiguing that might be. We want to watch the environment. As we said, too much or too little can go south on us. So we need to think about Too little stimulation might be the person sleeping throughout the day, and that can be problematic. And now that we have a person who wants to be up all night, and it's one thing if they're going to be up at night and they would sit nicely in the living room and could watch a favorite TV show or listen to music and thumb through a book, but if in fact they're going into other residence rooms, that's not going to work very well for everyone in the home. Or we might have people who start getting into other people's things or into things we don't want them to be in. Likewise, if there's too much stimulation, what we often see is they become overwhelmed and they just can't focus. And this can really be a problem, particularly if we're wanting to focus them on the self-care. I think especially during mealtime, I worry if there's too much noise or commotion, if there's music playing that is not comforting or comfortable to people, it can be too stimulating. People are likely to get up and walk away from mealtime, or we might see that during activities or even visits when too many family members come in. It becomes so overwhelming. We see a person who just gets up and walks away. We might see it manifested in anxiety or even physical or verbal agitation. Again, a person could not only start maybe pacing about or wanting to get out of the home, or they might start picking their skin, or we might just see, perseveration of verbal statements or even heightening or unwanted language. And then it's important to think about, these evening rituals as well. So rituals and routines go throughout the day and the evening. And there's some wonderful work that I've become a fan of that's happening in Australia in some of their care homes, where they have really instituted some significant bedtime and evening routines, because they were interested in reducing the amount of medications that were being given to people living with dementia during the bedtime. And one of the things they did was control the lighting, again, make it much softer in the evening. They instituted routines for each individual resident. And interestingly, the staff started putting on bathrobes and would go into residents' rooms, and they would yawn and say, oh, I don't know about you, it's been such a busy day. And they would go about this evening routine. Again, this idea of how do we create an environment that also helps to indicate to a person that the time is passing, you're passing with it, and we're providing a level of stimulation that helps you have a sense of what's going on and maintaining control.
Dan, we have a couple of questions.
Please.
Perfect. Okay, as the residents see changed behavior, what can you recommend that will make it easier for the dementia resident to handle some of the new behaviors, such as masks or distancing, things that we're probably doing just right now?
Yeah, the masks are really, really difficult. I have to say, I don't know how we get around that whatsoever. One thought I have is from a distance, before we approach the resident, keeping our distance, pulling off the mask and pulling their attention to our face. So I think that they can see our face, that they see us smiling purposely at them. We have their attention, and then put on the mask before we move forward to it. So we want to be as intentional as we can. So I might even try to mimic what it is now I want to do with or to the person with dementia before I even approach them. So again, my mask would be off, I'm maintaining my distance, I have their attention, I'm trying to communicate. Maybe I'm going to comb their hair, that I'm going to assist them to eat. So I'm going to perhaps show them the food, show them the spoon, and be moving the spoon towards them so they have a sense of what I'm doing. And again, I'm smiling, and now I'm placing my face mask on and moving slowly and purposely for them. And again, maintaining that smile, because remember, they're gonna be connected to our eyes, and our eyes too will show a smile. So that would be something I would be doing, but making sure that they can see my face, because it's frightening. This is just frightening.
Absolutely. All right, one more question and then we'll let you continue. How do you handle introducing changes in personnel due to like a sickness of a caregiver, somebody that's typically there that is no longer there, and maybe there's a new person there?
Yeah, so this is where that abbreviated life story, I am such a fan of. Again, these are kind of a one page that would say, you know, my name is Jan. I grew up in Michigan. I love to talk about my children, Katie and Tommy, and my favorite animal's name is Lily. And I don't like to get up before 9 o'clock in the morning. I like drinking my coffee black. I like my shower at night. I mean, that sort of thing. So that we have something abbreviated that we can do a quick rundown. You know, this is who she is. This is what she likes. This is how she likes it done. So this idea that this person doesn't walk in and knows nothing about who this resident is they're caring for, because they're likely to do it all wrong. And again, here's a person that wants to do it right, and they can't because we haven't given them enough of this person's story to help them know, again, what are distractors. You know, again, the what not to do for this resident is as important to what to do. So I hope that helps. But you've got to give to this new caregiver some clues about what you know that keep this person comfortable.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for picking up on both of those. I think they're incredibly important, and I know how stressful it is. As you know, I just think again, when I go in and care for someone and I don't know them, how I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, because the last thing I want to do is cause disruption, and they're likely to feel that energy. They could feel my nervous energy that could translate in a negative way, and we're going to come to that because they're going to pick up on our emotion very, very quickly. So the best thing we can do is help our coworkers know how to succeed with a resident. So here would be another, you know, is in terms of keeping the calm, is how to engage the resident throughout the day, and what are those things that they particularly like, that they find pleasure and joy in. And, you know, I know in care homes, it's not like most people are going to have an activities director. And even I find with activities directors, often we're more interested in serving the group than we are the individuals. And so it's important to remember that we are all searching for meaning in our lives throughout our day, and we find often our meaning through the activities that we carry out. So again, right now, many of us are totally out of our element because the things that have brought us meaning, now we're not able to do. So it's a really important thing to think about. Then how do I modify that? So the reality is that people living with dementia, though, often have difficulty initiating activities, right? They're forgetting how to do that. And so it requires that they have a partner or a companion who comes with them, and that companion is you. So if you're interested in being present with them and doing something, they're more likely to be receptive. And I think you've all seen that in your own staff and in your own work that you do. So I like to always remind caregivers that activities of daily living, so dressing, grooming, bathing, eating, are all activities, which is why we call them activities of daily living. I think we tend to minimize the impact of those activities on daily life, and particularly mealtime. I think it's an important time where, you know, food is just part of every culture. It's where we come together. It's where we connect with one another. And so how do we keep these routines going and keep fun going? So, you know, music during the mealtime that we notice that residents seem to respond to, or get us discussing about a time in life, and particularly between the years of 18 and 25. And, you know, what kind of music did you listen to during your dinner time? Or What was your favorite recipe? And remember, we can have the same discussion, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because these are folks who are going to rapidly forget. It's not really about the discussion point as it is including them, and that engages them in that activity. Again, when I bathe people with dementia, I know that it's a very intrusive and a very intimate activity. It's so important that I engage them in discussion about a favorite topic or a favorite animal, or this is where I'll have favorite music, or we'll just start singing along, because I want them to be part of this and not to be fearful in something that I'm doing often to them. But then think about, how can we include residents in household activities? What are those repetitive tasks that they can do, whether it be sweeping the floor, even if the floor doesn't need to be swept? Could they put napkins on the silverware, on the table, placemats? Could they put a glass on the table? Could they help clear the table once the dinner hour is over? What could they do in their own rooms if possible? And again, I know it depends on the level of resident that you have, and certainly more bedbound residents aren't going to be able to participate in those sorts of activities. We think about things that can be done individually, whether it's listening to music. I'm a big fan of picture books, because a picture's worth 1,000 words, versus maybe what could be done in a small group. And this is where, again, I come back to food, or even these gardening kinds of activities where people can pot, whether it be real plants or just artificial flowers. Vanity activities are really nice, particularly if there's some music going on and we just make it a special time. And even if that is only doing a hand massage, how beneficial that can be. And I've always been so impressed in working with people with dementia, how they respond to even things like a hand massage, and how often within probably under 30 seconds that they're trying to massage my hand back. You can think about the rituals that you can create in your own home for, whether you're doing an afternoon tea, or maybe you're doing a happy hour, again, with a glass of wine or a glass of juice. Doesn't really much matter to me, but it's more the ritual of coming together. And quite honestly, that's what happy hour is. It's about a ritual of just being with friends. Again, these spiritual and religious activities provide such meaning, and I particularly like them at bedtime, as so many people who are of faith, and again, we should know that, and we should know the particulars of their faith, if there's a scripture verse, if there's a prayer, if there's a Bible, if there's a prayer shawl, if there's rosary beads, whatever that is, that tactile even portion can really provide a tremendous spiritual connection to the God they're often missing. And then music, we know, is just such a powerful medium. Just a couple comments about TV. I'm not a huge fan of television by and large, simply because I think the channels get dictated by us and not the resident. But it should be something that we're thinking about can engage everyone, and certainly should be nothing violent or complex, and absolutely no news. There is no good news on these days. But here are some of my favorite things that I think can be streamed through the TV that are really quite wonderful, that could engage folks. So there's been some work done in this area called slow TV, where again, these are scenes that are moving relatively slowly. And again, for the person who is thinking slower, which is a person living with dementia or just a frail elder, it's amazing how just taking in a beautiful sight or an animal or whatever that might be in a slowed version can be incredibly helpful. So through the national parks, actually, there's some incredible virtual visits that you can make and go to some of the most famous places, whether you be at Yosemite or Yellowstone or whatever your favorite national park might be. And then some of the zoos and aquariums are also making these virtual visits possible with these live cams. So I think many people will have gone to these parks or these places, which is why I provided them. So in the San Diego Zoo, you can go visit a lot of the different animals in various parts of the zoo. And then likewise in the Monterey Bay Aquarium, you can go from the penguins to the octopus. That's really quite interesting what you're able to do. And then finally, through the museum access and portals, it's amazing the number of museums that you can actually go take a visit and take your time and wander through and have an interactive experience. I'll tell you that we've been doing a lot of nature visits on YouTube videos that have brought tremendous calm in our own home, whether it be visiting a national park or going to a rainforest or going to Fiji or Hawaii and watching waterfalls. But there are numerous nature videos, and I would say that is probably the best TV that you could get and use throughout the day in short periods of time. The final is kind of watching for delirium. And again, right now, as I think about COVID, this is how it might present is with delirium. And this is with just older adults in general or people with really compromised health. The brain as an organ is really at risk when we see sudden infection or certainly medications, constipation. I mean, there can be a variety of things, but certainly when we see a sudden change in memory, thinking, behavior, or we see an onset or worsening of hallucinations, again, that's seeing things that aren't there, we need to be concerned that something else is going on, and this is a time where we are calling the primary care doctor or the home visit doctor. Our goal is to avoid emergency visits at all costs, if that is even possible. But again, we have to do what's in the best interest of the resident and what their advanced directives are also telling us and what their medical decision makers are advising to us. I know each person is very different in that way. I'm going to stop here for any questions, and then we're going to talk about these communication practices.
Yeah, I've got another question for you, Jan.
Yes.
And that is, what approaches can caregivers take to handle the lack of family members or other favorite people that the dementia resident may be missing or expecting?
Well, as a matter of fact, I'm going to come up to that, Brian. You're just always 2 steps ahead of me. So let's go through communication, and then I want to talk about families, okay, and what they can do, because I think there's some significant things. Is that all right? That's good?
Awesome. That's awesome.
Okay, so we talked about kind of the managing the stress. So this picture here, again, shows somebody who's looking angry and looking in the mirror. And so this is where I say residents living with dementia are going to mirror what they see in us. So if they see stress, if they see upset, they're already feeling stressed. They're adding stress because, and they think it must be them that's doing it. They don't have the ability to decipher. And so looking in the mirror, boy, before we go in, becomes really important. And I love teaching this from the perspective that if dementia were a bookcase and we look at this graphic and we see the brain on the left is the healthy brain where all the books are sitting on the shelves, nice and ordered. And the top shelves represent new information, things that you're learning now and you can talk about later, to kind of complex thinking and decision making, to longer term stories and information, down to the very bottom shelves, which is emotional memory of where we experience love, joy, happiness, to fear, anxiety, frustration, anger. So when dementia progresses, we see that the top shelves fall off. So of course, people don't remember that they ate breakfast. And of course, they don't remember that they have 5 grandchildren, because right now they don't necessarily even remember all 3 of their children's names. And as we go a little further down, the books are falling off the shelf of a favorite story they love to tell, and now they're filling in with things that don't necessarily fit in the story. It's not that they're lying, but if I tell them, why are you saying that? You're making that up. Don't lie like that. The books on my bottom shelf while living with dementia are still intact. So what am I feeling? I'm feeling accused. I'm feeling threatened. I'm feeling that you're upset with me and you're yelling at me, and I'm likely to mirror the same emotion back. So it's a really important concept that we keep in mind, that people living with dementia feel first. So they are going to read our nonverbal communication loud and clear. So remember, verbal communication is about 7%. The rest of communication is nonverbal. And that's why I suggest with the face mask, it's really so important that people see us without the mask, that they see a smile, that they see our kindness, and they're certainly going to hear it also in our voice. But I think to see a relaxed body tone and to see a smile on the face, to see laughter, is going to put them in a much better place for feeling love, joy, and happiness. So it's really important, again, during these COVID times and in general, that we always identify ourselves to the resident. Again, that mask, I think, has got to come off from a distance. Let them see our face, keeping eye contact. We want to move slowly. I always like to extend my hand to the resident, and now I know, we're wearing gloves far more frequently, but touch can feel good for those who like to be touched. Obviously, I'm calling them by preferred names. Again, that's so important to know about nicknames, because it could be, as people are forgetting, again, books are falling off the shelf, they might revert back to a nickname that sounds much more comfortable to them and comforting. And then as we talk to them, we're providing shorter, simpler sentences or phrases. If we're asking a question or giving a command, it's one question or one command at a time. And then we provide time for the person to answer. And this is one of the areas that I've been real impressed with in dementia-friendly communication skills, that we say that for some individuals, we need to allow for up to 20 seconds for a person with dementia to respond. And that seems like an absolute eternity. And yet, we should be looking at that person's eyes to see, are they confused? Because we often say the eyes are the windows to the soul. So are the eyes looking confused, or are the eyes looking like, I'm thinking about it? So it's important that we give people time to respond to what we're asking or what we're telling them to do. Again, this nonverbal communication of mimicking, of pointing, gesturing can be incredibly important, because those gestures are very, very universal. Again, we always treat this person with dignity and respect. As they say, if we're talking over them or past them, I don't feel included. And if I'm not feeling included, maybe over this dinner hour, and I feel like you're ignoring me, what you might see is anger, because what I am sensing really isn't at an emotional level. Again, being aware of your own feelings. That's why I often say, hold up a mirror. And if you could see kind of what it is you're showing in your body language and in your voice tone, you might see why things are escalating. So it's really important that we control the tone of our voice, that it be very positive, and that we have these very friendly facial expressions. Again, but we're humans and we get upset, and sometimes we might be short in our response. Again, that makes us human. It doesn't make us bad people or bad caregivers. But again, acknowledge emotion first. So let's say you just walk in and right away you've got an angry resident. I think it's best to agree. I see you're upset. I'm so sorry to see that you're upset. Come on, I'd like to make this better. Let's go, let's go get a cookie. Or I think I saw your daughter sent a card. And we always want to have their attention when we're speaking to them. Again, always making sure that they can hear us, and always being patient and supportive. You know, there's so many residents, as you all know, with advanced disease who develop this word salad. You know, the words just jumble together. But to let them know that you're listening and you're trying to understand is really what's most important. Again, agreeing, I see you're trying to tell me something, and gee, I'm sorry, I don't quite know. Let's figure this out together. Just can feel so incredibly comforting.
Jan, another question came in.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Are there any dietary changes and or exercises, physical and mental, that can help the residents with dementia?
So, you know, this is certainly a hot area to look at. What is the benefit of it? Really, exercise, nutrition, and cognitive exercises in slowing or delaying the progression of dementia. The best studies I have seen is around physical activity, and that is aerobic exercise. So getting your heart rate up. When they've done control studies of people who were sedentary living with dementia, and these were done in mild cases, people with both mild cognitive impairment, early Alzheimer's disease, and people who were engaged in physical activity 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, where they broke a sweat, so it was aerobic, they showed slower decline in cognitive abilities. Now, there's a lot of work happening in the dietary field. It's more in the prevention field than it is in the treatment of people with dementia. And certainly I'm reading anecdotal cases, but we don't have large scale studies to show that significant dietary interventions are slowing progression of disease, nor are we necessarily seeing it in the cognitive engagement or cognitive rehab field, but it goes without saying that the more you use it, probably the slower you're going to lose it, if that makes sense. But there aren't real definitive studies around that because they're so incredibly costly. You're seeing most of the work around studies looking at pharmacy therapeutics to see if they can slow or delay the progression of Alzheimer's. So let's talk a little bit now about how family and friends can stay connected. So certainly, you know, the phone is a way to stay connected. Luckily, through iPads and iPhones, you know, FaceTime is really wonderful. Zoom has certainly turned out to be revolutionary, but so are letters and cards. So I think we need to really talk to each family and think about the capability of each resident. So for example, I'm thinking there's a daughter that I know whose mom has advanced Parkinson's disease with some dementia. And one of the things that she has done, and now her mom's in a care home and she can't go in and see her, but she kept all of the cards that her father had sent to her mother, and they had quite a lovely love story. And so the care home staff are now using these letters and cards and daily reading them to her mom as a reminder of how loved she is. So, and you know, that works for her at this point with advanced disease, but they see just a real settling and satisfaction when this takes place. Certainly the phone and the FaceTime, whenever we can see somebody, it's certainly a better connection for the person living with dementia. But this is where I think we can help our families, you know, to bring about topics that the person loves to talk about. So rather than saying, what's new, what have you been doing today, what did you have for breakfast, all of that's relying on memory. That's just really tough for a person living with dementia to do, and it's likely then to be a pretty short call. Rather than to say, you know, why don't you ask your mom about the trip you took to Yellowstone National Park? She loves to tell that story. So if we can get them to talk to the person and get them to reminisce or to story tell, it really helps the resident to feel better. Again, we're playing into their emotional memory. they're recalling a time that was fun and good. It keeps it upbeat. Again, we want to remind our families the last thing we want to do is to argue, to correct, or try to explain to them. It's just going to add to the frustration. And then I think about the when, you know, we should tell families what's the best time of the day to be calling or to be FaceTiming or Zooming with the person. You know, can we use it as a form of distraction? If the resident is getting upset for some reason, or we're suspecting that they're really feeling lonely, can we say to the family, hey, you know, we noticed that when your mom hears your voice for 5 minutes, you just make her feel so much better, and tell them what it is you want them to tell mom to make her feel better. Again, brief is fine. These do not have to be long interactions. And then like any other thing that we do, we want to frequently evaluate what is working and what is not working. So again, do we find that maybe there's even a favorite family member who seems to connect better? And right now we all have probably more of an abundance of time. Can we ask you each day for 10 minutes to make this call or to read this letter or whatever that might look like? So this is where we have to think creatively. What is it that's going to, again, come back to that bottom shelf? What's going to make that person feel good? That's going to help them feel loved and supported and engaged during a time where, unfortunately, so many of us are having to isolate from the people that we love. So I know we just have a couple minutes left remaining, but again, you all keeping the calm as you try to maintain your calm is going to be the best medicine for the residents living with dementia, and just those even without. And that structure and routine that you provide just can be so incredibly comforting. Again, we draw from our routines to keep us comfortable. And make sure you're watching your nonverbals, that the person doesn't feel your stress. And if they feel your stress, go ahead and say, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean this to happen. I'm so happy I can be here with you. You know, keeping it fun and helping our families know what they can do too can make a difference. So with that, I know our time has gone very, very quickly. We just have a few minutes left, but I would love to answer any other questions you might have.
I know Brian had a question. Brian, would you like to ask your?
Yeah, okay, yeah, I guess so. So it's an ending question. First of all, would you make your slides available? There's a lot of very useful information in there. Can you make those available to us?
Absolutely. So I'll send them to Molly and she can send them out.
All right, that's fantastic. So Molly, unless there's any other questions in the group, are there?
We don't have any questions.
Okay, in that case, before I hand it back to Molly to end us off, I'd like to say thank you very much for spending time with us on this important subject, particularly now as all of our members are dealing with a variety of stresses. And so, and since 70% of the residents in residential scale assisted living are typically having some level of dementia, what you're saying is very, very helpful. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for all you're doing. This is hard work, and these are extraordinary times. And I want you to know that what you do matters so much. So thank you for all you're doing.
Great. Molly?
Well, everyone, thank you for attending. And like I said, you guys are going to get a copy of this recording, and it sounds like Jan's going to send us her slides. So I'll also send you a copy of her slides for reference. I know there was some links in there. We are going to have as many webinars as we can possibly fit over the next month or two, with all of us being unable to go and do our normal activities. So keep a lookout on our blog and our newsletter for upcoming webinars, and of course check your email. But otherwise, everyone have a great evening, and thank you so much, Jan.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan.
Mm-hmm.
Bye-bye.